Good afternoon, everyone. Although I guess it's afternoon here in Ontario. Don't know if it's afternoon where you are. Perhaps you are joining me and it's breakfast time. Maybe you're eating your lunch. So hopefully we can enjoy your lunch together. My name is Juliet Aurora, and I am going to be your host for the next 45 minutes to an hour. And we're going to be talking about how to create an onboarding program for your clients. So I hope that everyone is all set and ready to learn lots of new stuff. And I'm hoping that you can learn from some of the mistakes that we've made in onboarding clients where we would onboard them and just as quickly offboard them. So hopefully you're able to learn from this so that you aren't having to go through that same cycle. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Just want to make sure that everybody can hear me. So if a couple people could please just type in the chat, let me know that you can actually hear me and I'm not just talking to myself randomly. Perfect. Okay. Hi, Brad and Teresa and Janet. Excellent. Thank you so much. Nice to see you all. I saw some of you not that long ago last week in Calgary at Get Connected Calgary. So surprised that you actually want to hear me again, but I'll take that as a compliment. Okay, good. And everyone says that the sound is going well. So Elaine and Jessica, Cheryl, Peter, Retta, Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me for the next 45 minutes to an hour. I know how busy everybody is and that you're going to share an hour of your time with me. I appreciate that. So some other housekeeping items. The purpose, or I guess the format is we're going to be online for about 45 minutes. I'm going to leave time for questions at the end. But if you have questions as you go along, feel free to jump in and ask them, and I'll try and address them as I go along. I want to make sure that we get through all the content, but so if it's a question that will require a long-winded answer from me, then I'll indicate that we'll leave it for the end. But otherwise, I'll try and answer them as they come to you. You also can request a recording of the webinar if you'd like afterwards. The email that has been reminding you of the coming webinar, just reply to it, say that you'd like a recording, and Intuit will send out a copy of the webinar for you. Okay, so let's get started on creating an onboarding program for your clients. So the agenda, because we're all detail people and like to know how everything's going to go. So I thought I'd start with an agenda. We're going to talk about, I guess, the fundamentals of onboarding, why it's important, especially from a client perspective at the beginning. So that's the introduction. We'll talk about the foundation, which is the actual, process that you have to start to lay out, what the onboarding looks like for a client, and then we'll finish it off with an example of some of the steps that we go through in our onboarding process at AIS Solutions. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm located in Burlington, Ontario, and run, I guess I'm the founder of AIS Solutions, which is our bookkeeping and QuickBooks training firm, as well as the co-founder of Ninja Network. So let's get started. So far, no questions, which is really good. And let's see if we can change these slides here. Okay, so we all have clients. It's what keeps us in business. And when we're a new business, everything runs kind of haphazardly and random. We get our first client and we're just so excited that we have our first client. Who remembers what it was like when you got your first client? I'm sure you were bouncing off the walls like I was, oh, somebody actually wants to pay me to do something. Then comes your second client, and then comes your third. And as you're adding on these new clients, you don't really, have a system or a process of what happens when a client comes on board. You wing it and you do the work, and you handle each situation differently depending on who the client is, what the industry is. But if you think about all the great companies out there, like Apple and Starbucks and Google, WestJet, Ritz-Carlton hotels, they're not the only one that's out there that's offering that service. And in some cases, they're not even going to be the best product or service in the market. But what they're known for is their customer service. And a lot of us as accounting professionals, we don't think of our accounting or bookkeeping practice as needing a customer focus. We take care of the books. What else are we supposed to do? And that's really what the focus of this webinar is going to be. It's going to be shifting the thinking so that you're creating the best customer service experience for your clients. Because quite honestly, the better that you take care of our clients, the better they're going to take care of our businesses. And it all starts at the very beginning, which is when they start with us, which is the onboarding process of their business into ours. So let's start with a definition of onboarding. So Wikipedia defines it as follows, which is the process of welcoming new clients into your business, addressing their questions and concerns, and ensuring they understand the services available to them. So if you think about your current practice, how would you describe your current onboarding process? Do you even have one? Is every client brought on in a different way? And if they are, then you don't really have an onboarding process. Basically, what you've done is you're adapting your individual process depending on who the client is. So let's start with a quote. For those of you that know me, you know that I love quotes. So this is a quote from Theodore Roosevelt. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And one of the biggest challenges in our industry is that we know a lot of stuff. We know a lot of stuff about QuickBooks. We know a lot of stuff about bookkeeping and accounting and tax. And sometimes we think that's enough. In the ever competitive industry, and especially as our industry becomes more competitive, what's going to matter more to the customer, and especially with the millennial generation, what matters to them more is actually not how much you know, but how much you care and how much they relate to you. And so how you think about your customers actually influences how it is that you respond to them. And that's another quote. So let's delve a little deeper into why we need to build out the customer experience from the beginning of the relationship. So you're probably wondering why this picture is up there when it's, we're talking about client onboarding. Why is there a terrified baby on the screen? Quite honestly, this is what your clients feel like. So our new clients, when they come to us, are nervous and anxious. Transferring their bookkeeping and accounting functions isn't an easy task for them. Most of the time, the functions don't reside at the top of their list, let alone when they have to make a switch and hire someone brand new. So if you're able to understand how they're feeling at the beginning, and you're able to acknowledge those feelings, it's going to go a long way to making their experience more enjoyable. And most of the time it's communication. And we're going to talk about some of the areas of communication a little bit later on, but either they've misinterpreted something we've said, or we've misinterpreted something they've said. So how you start this relationship with them is really going to determine how it continues as well as how it ends. So you want to be as clear as possible at the beginning when you start the relationship. The other reason of creating a client onboarding experience is something I call a goodwill bucket. We're all going to mess up at some point. We're human, we all mess up. Even the best companies out there make mistakes. But it's how you resolve those mistakes that's going to be what determines if the client is going to stay with you. So you want to build up some goodwill in the relationship, and we call it our goodwill bucket, with positive experiences so that they're going to get you through the negative ones. So you want to fill that bucket early in the relationship and as often as you can. If you think about it, most of our clients are probably the most excited to work with us at the very beginning. They're excited about the changes we're going to bring. They're excited about what we're going to do, how much easier their life is going to be. So you're filling that goodwill bucket with that excitement. So you want to try and extend that process as much as possible. So I'm going to digress for 2 minutes and talk about whether or not the client that you're onboarding is the right fit. It really is something that you need to determine before you get to this process. But if they're not the right fit, your client onboarding experience isn't going to be standardized either, because you're going to have so many different types of clients coming on. So you always, you hear at a lot of the conferences where people talk about ideal clients, whether you want to specialize in a niche. The more that you are able to narrow what that client looks like for you, the more you're going to be able to standardize and streamline that client onboarding process, and the better the experience is going to be for them. So you do want to determine if they're the right fit in the sales process, not in the onboarding process. Okay, so let's jump in. Any questions so far? Nope, we're all good. Okay, so what we're going to do is we've determined that your brand new client is nervous. Even if they're a startup and aren't transferring from another accounting professional, they're going to be nervous because it's all new for them. It's usually beyond their comfort zone. They don't know what they don't know. And so they're looking to you to be the expert. So what you want to do is you want to determine, what does that experience look like for them? What is the time frame that's going to be involved? Who is going to be involved in these first few stages? If it's just yourself, that's fine. If you have a team and the team gets involved, you need to be able to introduce those team members into this process and into the dynamic. You're also going to start setting your expectations. So, for example, these first steps, you can do them in a task list. You can do them in a flow chart. We do task lists in our project management system. And when we started to try to identify what we wanted the experience to look like with them or feel like for them, it was I think it was 10 steps. We're now at about 75 steps, and our steps in our onboarding pretty much cover the first 3 months of their experience with us. So we don't only talk about what it's going to look like at the beginning, but we have some touch points that are a little bit later on in the process, so that with the first 3 months, we're filling that goodwill bucket as much as we can. So we've talked a little bit here about setting expectations, but let's delve a little bit deeper into setting expectations. So the first step in exceeding your customers' expectations is to know what they are. And if you look at the little diagram, the expectations when your client walks in through the door is that everything's, it's just going to go onwards and upwards from here, and it's just going to be an amazing experience from start to finish, and that's what it's going to look like, this straight arrow. And then the picture on the right is what the reality of it looks like. It usually doesn't go smoothly. There's usually glitches, but being able to make sure that you're identifying that there is going to be, there's going to be some challenges, and you want to make sure that you talk about them. So communication, and we talked about this already. You want to communicate with them. Part of the fear and the anxiousness that they feel is because they don't know what's going to happen. Whether they're a startup or they've been with somebody before, you likely do things differently than the previous bookkeeper. And they're probably, coming to you because they weren't happy with their previous bookkeeper or something's happened. Because very few companies change bookkeepers when everything's running smoothly. So laying out the expectations for them at the beginning is what's going to make the difference between how they feel about this process. And it really will make a difference for you as well, because you're going to hear from them as you lay out what these expectations are, what hesitations they have or what concerns they have, so that you can address them. Miscommunication of expectations is probably the biggest reason that clients get frustrated. They think that you should be doing something and they're not. You think they're supposed to be doing something and they're not. Or you think it's done already and it isn't done. So this step is probably the most important in the whole relationship with your client, but especially at the beginning. So a couple of things that we always tell them when we start is it's going to be messier before it's clean. A lot of people don't want to hear that, but that's usually the reality of it, especially when you're bringing someone on and there's some catch up or cleanup. There's a lot of time that's involved from them at the beginning as you try and understand their business. So we always tell them, yes, here is the end goal, but it's going to get messier before it gets cleaner. We tell them that it's likely going to be harder for them before it gets easier. And again, they will say, well, I've come to you because I want it to be easier. And absolutely, we're going to get you to the point where it's easier. We're going to automate things and create financial ecosystems for you. But until we go through this transition process, it's likely going to be harder. We also tell them that it's probably going to involve more of their time at the beginning than it usually does. And you're probably thinking, okay, well, if I'm telling them all this negative stuff, I'm going to scare them. And quite honestly, you're not. Or I guess in our experience, we have found that if we didn't set the expectations, there was more frustration as we went through the process because they didn't know what to expect. And we have found that if we tell them these three things, that it's going to be messier before it gets clean, it's going to be harder for them before it gets easier, and it's going to involve more of their time at the beginning than it normally will once we're running smoothly, they expect it. And if you're able to make it, that transition go really smoothly, you're already a rock star because they're expecting it to be harder. So you want to lay out those expectations. And they may not hear it the first time. So because they're just so relieved that someone's going to look after their bookkeeping. So you may need to repeat it. And you may need to repeat it more than once. That is also the step that's going to take the relationship to the next level. Okay, so let's go back to the process. So any questions before we keep moving forward? Excellent. Okay, so either everyone's asleep or everyone has left, or I'm just covering everything so brilliantly. It's got to be one or the other, right? Okay, so now we're going to create a process. And if you've attended any of my other webinars for Intuit, you'll know, or you're probably saying to yourself, what? Another process. I'm big on processes for absolutely everything. So we have one around our client onboarding. So there actually was a question that I missed, which was what management tool or app are we using? So for our practice management, we're using Teamwork. And it's teamwork.com. We started using it about 5 years ago. And at the time when we started using it, there was nothing out there for our industry. So teamwork.com was designed for web design SEO companies. And then we just customized it and made it do and jump through hoops that it didn't necessarily mean to do. So if you're looking for a practice management system, there are a lot, that are really customized for our industry. That's probably what I would recommend. Arrow is one, Carbon, those are probably the two big ones. QuickBooks Online has a practice management built into their system, so you can certainly do it in that. They've released the new feature that it doesn't need to be tied, to a client in your QBO dashboard. It can be a client that's on, a different platform. So you really can use it or customize it. Okay, so we've got a couple more questions. And my questions aren't showing up here. Hold on a second. Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so do I have the potential client complete a questionnaire when they first come into contact with us? So that's on the sales process, and yes, absolutely. We have a questionnaire that we have a fairly extensive, sales process, which my partner Steve looks after. But yes, there is a questionnaire that we want to learn as much about them at the beginning before they become a client to make sure that they are the right fit for us. Okay, perfect. So now let's get back to the process. So as I said, I'm big on processes. And I mentioned that when we started, we had a task list. It had 10 items. And it was, the 10 items were pretty basic. They were, create a client engagement letter, get the signature, get the RC59, get the pre-authorized debit form so that we could collect our fees. If they're using QuickBooks Desktop and we're converting them, get their QuickBooks Desktop file, get their paperwork. So, it was really, really high level. And we're now at 75 steps for that same onboarding experience. But what you want to do is you want to start to lay it out and start small. Don't think that you need to have, 50, 25, 50, 75 steps. what you want to do is you want to start at the very basic. It's a starting point for you, and as you go through them, then you can start to fill it in. So you want to be as specific as possible as to what do you want that experience to be like for them. Think about how you want them to feel. Do you want them to feel relieved? Do you want them to feel, that you're the expert? Do you want them to feel, usually you don't want them to feel overwhelmed. So not only do you have to think about what you want them to feel, you want to think about what you don't want them to feel. And the next step then is, what is that actually going to look like? So if one of the feelings you don't want is overwhelm, then if you think about the clients that you've onboarded to date, what is it that usually they get overwhelmed with? There's going to be a pattern if you think about the clients that you've already brought on. What were the sticking points? Where did you find that you always went wrong, or your client always got frustrated? You want to identify those things, put them in setting your expectations at the beginning, but then also documenting it. Okay, so how do you want them to feel? Well, we want them to feel like it's a positive experience. And what kinds of things that resonate with who we are as a practice is going to make them feel have a positive experience. So we're going to go through the steps that we use in our practice individually a little bit later on. But so think about that. So I don't want to, kind of tell you information now that may influence how you're thinking. I want you to think about this from your practice perspective and how it is, within your practice and you as a person. How do you want them to feel? Okay, so we have another couple questions. Do I meet with the clients before sending the questionnaire? Okay, so this is back to our sales process. No, we don't. Usually it is, we're very fortunate that we now get to be really picky about who we want to work with. And so if the client does not fill out our questionnaire, Steve won't talk to them. So we do make them fill out the questionnaire at the beginning. And is there a slide handout? I believe that the slides and the recording are available, but you do need to request them. I don't think that they just send them out automatically. So you would just need to request them. Just reply to the email that was sending out the reminders for you about the webinar coming up, and just let them know you'd like the slide deck. Okay. So back to the process, you want to make sure that you've created some steps as to what that experience looks like for them. And let me change my slide here if it's cooperating. Okay, so time frame. When you're thinking about your process, the time frame is usually the biggest disconnect between expectation and reality. So you want to be really, really clear on what this looks like. When clients come on board and they sign up with you and they are ready to give you their bookkeeping, there's just usually such a feeling of relief for them that they now aren't having to think about it. And their next question is, okay, you got all my stuff. When can I get my financial statements? When's my HST or GST going to be filed? When am I going to know what my sales are? So they don't necessarily understand, even though it's taken them 2 years to get to the place that they're at, that it's going to take you some time to get up to speed and get everything caught up and get everything cleaned up. So you want to make sure that you're outlining a time frame. Usually the biggest disconnect between expectation and reality is the time frame. So be as clear as possible. Make sure you give yourself some cushion. Build enough cushion in there. You've probably heard the phrase, under promise and over deliver. If you get the setup and cleanup done sooner than you said you were going to, that's awesome. You're filling up your goodwill bucket. If not, at least you're not starting off the relationship not living up to what you promised. So even if you give them the time frame, okay, it's going to take me 3 weeks to get all of your stuff caught up. Even if they say to you when you give them the 3 weeks, really, it's going to take that long? Are you sure you can't do it faster? Don't shorten the time frame. Say it's going to take 3 weeks. And if it only takes you a week, awesome. But the likelihood is that most clients always underestimate how much information is required in that initial phase. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to also explain to them what the time frame is dependent upon and what can cause delays. And usually the delays are them, where they think they've given you everything, but they haven't. You're waiting for a bank statement. They've given you 12, or they've given you 11 of the 12 months. You're waiting for 1 month. Sometimes, usually whenever there's a delay, it's dependent upon them. So you have to, again, lay it out. It's 3 weeks, assuming I have all the information. You respond to my questions when I ask them, and I get everything from you in a timely manner. And maybe even define what a timely manner is, dependent on what it is with your practice and what that time frame is. And it'll also depend on how busy they are. If they're feeling overwhelmed, you don't want to tell them, well, I need a response back from you in 2 hours, otherwise I can't meet this 3-week deadline. If they're telling you, and maybe ask them the question, typically if I'm to ask you something, how do you want me to communicate with you? Is it email? Is it by Slack or by text? Do you want me to create a list for you and send it to you? And then about how long do you think it would take you to get back to me? And if they tell you it's going to take 2 or 3 days every time you need to send them a request, then you need to extend that 3-week time frame. So just make sure you're building enough cushion in there for you that you have the opportunity to either over deliver or at least come in on time. This timetable, and usually we make it clear as well when we talk about what the time frame is dependent upon and what can cause delays. We also talk about that with respect to our monthly services. That yes, here are our deliverables that we're promising you, but we need stuff from you. So you can tie them in as well into the ongoing monthly services if there is no cleanup. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the flow of how things need to move. So you need to think about, not only from your client's perspective, internally, what do you need to have set up at your end in order to determine this time frame? And again, we're talking about time frame because it's one of the biggest disconnects. So this can be, as part of your process, is what needs to be set up internally at your end. So for us, we need to add them into our project management system. We need to add them into, our client list. We need to add them, add our team into their QBO file. So there's certainly things internally that we need to do when we onboard a new client. You also are going to have an onboarding meeting with them. What do you need to cover to make sure, other than, from your perspective, we've talked a lot about making sure that you're setting the expectations and making the client feel comfortable, but what needs to be discussed from your perspective? The other thing, and a lot of people don't think about this in terms of onboarding a client, but it's something that we've implemented or started implementing, I'd say probably the last 6 to 8 months, especially with QuickBooks Online and the apps and the creation of the ecosystems, is what we really do now is our clients were finding that it was overwhelmed for them. That they would sign up with us and we connect them to HubDoc and Pluto and Receipt Bank and WagePoint and, T-Sheets, and we get them all, and it would just be overwhelmed for them. So we started to break it out into phases and said, okay, phase 1 is this. It's going to be getting your books current. It's going to be connecting HubDoc so that we can start to get your documentation. And then once we have that process running smoothly, then phase 2, let's start worrying about your payroll and outsourcing your payroll. So you may want to break it down into phases. And if you're breaking it down into phases, think about it from a couple of different perspectives. One is, what is the client's biggest pain point? If payroll is their biggest pain point, then you want that in an early phase. You don't want to push that out to phase 3 or phase 4. But if they're running with ADP already and it's running, relatively smoothly, it's not perfect, but it's functional, then maybe transferring over to WagePoint is a little bit further down the road. So don't think that you need to do everything up front at the beginning. you want to be able to make the transition as smooth as possible for the client. So sometimes it really can be where you have to spread it out a little bit, because if they are moving from a desktop or having no system or software in place, then they really are they're gonna feel a little overwhelmed, especially because they've got applications to sign up for and forms to sign. So sometimes breaking it up also makes it easier for them. So think about what you need to get started. So documentation, database access, app connection. If they've got apps connected already to their QuickBooks Online, then you need to be able to make sure that you know what those are. If you need logins and passwords, third-party programs that are going to feed information into QBO, you need all of that information. And then after looking at all of that, again, how long is this going to take you? And be realistic. So when we're talking about deliverables, again, you want to talk about, you don't want to overwhelm them with all the things they're going to need to be responsible for, but you want to make it clear that you can't do it on your own, that they are going to have to participate. Okay, so the last piece is who's going to be involved. So if it is just yourself, it's fairly straightforward. If you have a team, introduce the team members that are going to be involved in the process and prepare them for what's going to come if there is a transition. So in our office, we have one person who is our client onboarding and implementation specialist. That's her title. Her title is actually Ninja Onboarding and Implementation Specialist, but that's all she does. And basically, she brings on the new client. She sets all these expectations. She sets up our processes, our internal processes as to how things are going to work, cleans up their books, and then does the transition to a lead bookkeeper and a senior and a junior team that we have. But we lay that out for them in our client onboarding meeting, which is this person is your starting point, and she's going to learn everything and how your business runs and what the challenges are that you were trying to address. She's going to get everything cleaned up, caught up, develop a process, and then you're going to get introduced to your full-time dedicated team. So preparing them for what's to come is really important. What you want to do is avoid as many surprises as possible. They may not hear everything that you say, but if it comes up down the road and you do mention it again, then it's probably going to trigger something. Oh yeah, I remember Juliet did say that. So absolutely, you want to prepare them as much as possible for what the process is going to look like. And again, tell them how long the process is going to take. What is that transition time going to look like from the time they sign up to the time that they're running with their primary team. Okay, so as I said, and you can hear me as a broken record, so you can tell that this has really been a big pain point for us with our onboarding process. So I'm trying to I guess drill it into you that please don't make the same mistakes that we've made, which is set the expectations, repeat the end result, and you're going to have to repeat it for them a couple times. Because you are giving them probably a lot of information that may overwhelm them, you're going to remind them at the end of this, what are they going to get? At the end of phase 1, this is what's going to happen. At the end of phase 2, this is what it's going to look like for you. And here is what the goal is at the end of this entire process. And again, who's responsible for what? Is it your team? Is it their team? What are the deliverables? And then what is that deadline? Okay, so see how we're doing for time here. We're good. Any questions? Okay, so do I sell or make available my templates for my process to Ninja members? I don't know if I believe our client onboarding task list is in Ninja. In the manage section is where it would be. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that that our client onboarding is. I think we have a different task list for employee onboarding, and I think that one is in there as well. So to answer your question, yes, it would be. So what are the key info that we ask our clients? So this is a question from Abe. What are the key info that you ask your clients? I mentioned pre-authorized. So are you asking about what documentation we get at the beginning of what it is that we're looking for? If that's what you mean, and if you have a chance, just type in and say let me know if I'm completely off track. But the key things that we're letting them know that we need is the pre-authorized debit, because everything that we do is billed at the beginning of the month in advance. If there is a cleanup or a catch-up or setup, it's 50% upfront of the cleanup and then 50% due when it's done. So the pre-authorized debit, we actually don't have the onboarding meeting until the pre-authorized debit form is signed. We don't need to process anything, but it needs to be signed, and that's part of our initial sales process. And so one of the other things that we ask for is a read-only access bank card. So it's mandatory. If they don't want to give us a read-only access bank card, then we don't take them on as a client. And we do that so that we're maintaining the HubDoc connections and we're maintaining the bank feed connections in QBO, and don't need to keep going back to them every time a security question comes up. And as if you guys are using either of those programs, then you already know, with the security changes that are coming out, that it disconnects. And so you need to be able to keep reconnecting them. So those are some things that are usually outlined that before they come to this client onboarding meeting. We call it a kickoff meeting. Those are the things that they need to bring with them or provide for us. If they aren't local to us and our first meeting is through Zoom, then they need to provide us with that information. If we're doing cleanup, catch up, any of the historical stuff. And we tell them, if it looks like it could remotely relate to your financial statements, if it has a number on it and it's related to your business, give it to us. If we don't need it, we won't use it. But rather than us having to keep going back and forth that we're missing this, if it has, and we basically say, if it has a number on it, give it to us, because we're going to probably need it. Okay, so one more question from Carol. Do you get CPE for this webinar? Honestly, I don't know. Yes, I don't know. I'm not sure if Shannon on the line from Intuit knows. If you do, if you could let everybody know. That's a good question though. And I'm not sure if you get CPE. So if anyone else even knows in the audience, that would be really helpful. Okay. Let's see some more questions. Teresa, what a great idea. Great. I have no idea what was a great idea, but okay. Good point on the bank feeds. Do you ask for your client's password? No, we never do, which is why we get our own read-only access card. From a security standpoint, we do not want the liability of having their bank card. So they have to get our own, which is read-only access. We have no ability to transfer, pay anything. All we can do is run reports and keep the connections going. Do we value price, and do we take into account their sales revenue level into your pricing? So yes, we do value price. Everything we've probably been value pricing since 2010. I think the beginning we were fixed pricing as opposed to value pricing. And if you're not sure what the difference is, there's tons of webinars that are out there on fixed pricing versus value pricing. And do we take into account their sales or revenue level? No, we don't. Regardless of what their sales are, it has nothing to do with how much work we may need to do or how much value we can provide. Whether they're a $100,000 a year revenue client or 100 million, although we don't have any that are 100 million, the revenue doesn't matter. It's the value we're providing and the work that we're doing. And again, a question on the CPE, and I don't have the answer. Sorry, I missed the details of what you get to avoid the security questions with HubDoc and QBO bank feed. So in order to avoid the security questions, we actually have our clients give us read-only access cards. So they go to their bank and they ask for, it's either called a delegate card or a read-only access card. It depends on the bank. All the big banks do it, and it's a card that's in our name. The client obviously has to approve it, but it's then our password, it's our security questions, it's not theirs. Okay, some banks don't allow read-only access. Do you just not take the client in that case? We haven't hit a bank yet that won't give us a read-only access card. If you can always do a workaround, like some of the I can't even think of the name, the smaller banks, the trust companies, will say that they don't do read-only access card. So we get them to give the client a secondary card, and the client is the approver that has to set limits on our card, and we get them to set the limits as low as they possibly can. So we have one, I think the limit is like $5, that we cannot do any transactions more than $5, and the transaction is the transaction limit is set at $5, but even if we try and initiate a transaction for $5, they still have to approve it. So even if there isn't theoretically a read-only access card, there is a card that you can get where you limit or you put so many restrictions on it that it can literally do nothing and is a read-only access card. Okay, do I have a key factor that I use to determine how they value the service? That's a webinar all by itself, Karen. So I'm not even going to touch that one because we're going to get completely off topic. So I want to make sure that we get through the client onboarding. It's a great question, Karen, but I think it's a little bit beyond the scope of this webinar. Okay, so we've now had our onboarding meeting. We've, the client has come on board. They're excited. They're a little overwhelmed, but they're excited. Now what? Now we start doing the work. And I've lost my mouse here. So what we also do is we do a post-onboarding meeting. So most of the, and this meeting basically is, it's a touch point, and you're going to have to determine based on what that time frame looked like when this takes place. So for example, if it's a 3-week time frame for the cleanup, then you could do it at the end of the 3 weeks. And what you want to find out from them is what's working. What are they happy with? What process, works well for them? Are they satisfied with what we've given them? You want to touch base, and again, make sure that you get a temperature check as to how they're feeling about the whole process. And again, it can be a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting. So after you've onboarded, and maybe it's after the setup or the cleanup is done, and you also want to hear them say the words about what's good in the relationship. So you ask this question first, what's working? But what you also want to do is find out what's not working for them. Because as important as what's working is you want to find out what they're frustrated with. Sorry. Excuse me. You want to find out what's not working for them, because you want to find out what their frustration is. So that's the feedback that's going to help you build a stronger relationship with them as you're providing the ongoing services. And sorry, I seem to have lost my voice. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. Too much talking, I guess. Okay, so when you're asking them about what's not working, what you have to make sure you're also doing, though, is that you are fixing the things that are their frustration. Because if all you do is hear them and then repeat the same mistake over and over again, or they keep feeling the same way over and over again, you're draining that goodwill bucket really, really quickly. So you do want to make sure that you are that you're resolving or coming up with some kind of solution for the things that are frustrating for them. And it may be, it may be a really small thing to you, but a really big thing to them, depending on what their personality is. But you do want to make sure that you are asking them the question. Okay, so the post-onboarding meeting takes place, again, different time frame depending on how long your cleanup setup process is. If you don't have a cleanup or a setup process and they're pretty much just coming in and everything is clean and you're just starting to do some day-to-day bookkeeping or accounting for them, then maybe do it at a 30-day mark and check and see and do a temperature check, especially if they are dealing with team members and not yourself. Sometimes you do lose a little bit of the disconnect. If you're doing the sales and your team is doing the work, you just want to reach out to them and make sure that that they're still feeling as excited about working with you, or if there's any challenges. Okay, so any questions? And then we're going to go through an example of ours. We're at 1:45. We've been answering questions as we go along, so I don't think I need to answer them as we go along. So I got a response back from Shannon about the CPE credits. She wasn't sure, but we'll find out. Okay, so an example of ours. So this is basically what ours is broken out into. It's 7 sections. And our first one is the initial information and onboarding. So this is, again, we're a team of 12, and we've got one person doing the sales, a separate person doing client onboarding and implementation, and then it gets transitioned to a full-time bookkeeping team. So we have to make sure that the information that has been learned in the sales process moves through that process as well, so that the client doesn't feel like we didn't listen to them and is having to repeat themselves. So our first step is the initial information and onboarding. So part of that initial information, is making sure that there's an engagement letter, that the proposal was signed, that we have all the paperwork, that we have the access to their QBO file, their RC59. So some of the documentation that I mentioned at the beginning. Once we have, a little bit of internal information, we set up the project in our project management system. We then have our task list that comes up. Then we conduct the kickoff meeting. And the kickoff meeting is when we are talking about expectations primarily and time frame. We also talk about what the transition is going to look like. If there's multiple phases, and we talk about that. More than anything, it's another opportunity for, as well, the client to connect with our team, because they've made a connection with the salesperson already. They haven't made a connection with the team that are actually going to be working on some of their stuff. So we make sure that we are asking the questions. What's your biggest pain point? What does success look like for you at the end of this? What is going to make you sleep better at night? That's what we find out and repeat in the kickoff meeting. And then we compare it to the information that the salesperson would have received in the sales process, to see whether or not it's still the same focus, because that's what we build our monthly services around. So then we do some internal onboarding, which is setting up our team on QuickBooks Online, on their database. If we have to connect any apps, we're doing those processes. We also have a welcome process. So the internal onboarding is also when we're doing the cleanup and the setup and the actual work that needs to be done before it is just a regular smooth running bookkeeping client. Sometimes it's really short, sometimes it's fairly lengthy. If there are any apps in the first couple of phases, then we'll start to connect those. And then we have a welcome process, which is for our client. And so if you think about the comment that I made at the very beginning, where I asked you to think about how do you want your client to feel, that's what kind of drove this welcome process from starting. So our clients go get a couple of different things. So this is after the kickoff meeting has taken place, and we actually have it in our process for it. The kickoff meeting has taken place, a checkbox is checked off, and then the next task is 7 days after that check off or that task has been checked off, that we actually have a letter that is, and it's a templated letter, but we have a letter that welcomes them to the AIS family. And we look forward to, being a part of your team. And I actually put my cell phone number in this letter, as well as my account supervisor's cell phone number, so that they know if there are any questions or any concerns at any time, you can contact us directly. Here's our email addresses, and here are our cell phone numbers. And then they're hand signed, and then they're mailed out. So that's the first thing that they all get. So that's about 7 days after the kickoff meeting has taken place. So after the kickoff meeting, there is a summary email that goes out, everything that was talked about, but then we're working and they don't really hear from us. So at the 7 to 10 day mark, when they receive this letter, and it doesn't matter where they're located, it gets mailed, we don't hand it to them. It's a nice touch point that we're trying to welcome them into the family, and as well they're doing that we're thinking about them. So that's after 7 days after the kickoff meeting. And then 7 days following that, they get a gift basket from us. The gift baskets vary depending on the client. We have a few standard ones that we send out, but one of them as well, or most of them include, we're very much into motivational and goal setting, and so one of them is a journal that's branded AIS, so we get some brand recognition out of it as well, but then it has motivational words all over it for business owners. So we send them a gift. And again, it doesn't have to be anything elaborate, it's the thought. And that's usually 7 to 10 days after the letter has been sent out. So we now, because usually we're still doing cleanup and setup at this point. And then one thing I forgot was in the kickoff meeting, for those of you that may have been at QB Connect in San Jose, there was a gentleman, and his name escapes me completely, who had, I guess they were bracelets that were done where you could personalize and stamp words on them, and it's called My Intent. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, just Google myintent.org. So we ended up buying this kit from the speaker at San Jose when we were at QB Connect last year, and when during the kickoff meeting, we actually make either a bracelet or a necklace or a keychain or something with the word that they get to pick. And so it connects us a little bit with them as well. So if you think about it, by the 3rd week that they're with us, not only are we relieving their pain of their bookkeeping or accounting, but they've received a bracelet from us. They've received a letter from us, and they've received a gift basket of some sort from us. So again, we're filling up that goodwill bucket because we know at some point there's going to be some frustration. Then there is a handoff process, and the handoff process is where it transitions from my client onboarding specialist to whoever the team is. We do email introductions. If they're local to us, it'll be, the new team will drop by with Tim Hortons. If it's a Zoom meeting and they're virtual for us, then it would be a Zoom meeting, just so that they can, put another face to who their team member is. And the follow-up that we do is usually 20 to 30 days after the handoff has taken place, and the follow-up is done by the client onboarding specialist, or it's done by the account supervisor. Depending on how smoothly everything has gone, it's one of those two. If it's been a little rocky, then usually it'll be me, and I'll jump in and touch base, or it'll be Steve, who's done the sales, to touch base and see how everything's gone. So that's our 7 steps, and we've got about 75 steps to make up those 7 sections, but that's kind of ours. And so I want to make sure that we answer some questions. Okay, so let's do my last 2 slides, and then we'll jump to the questions. Okay, so the end result is you're going to put these processes in place, and there can be, start with 1 or 2. Don't worry about trying to build out 15 processes for this. Start with 1 or 2. it's going to make such a difference in their experience that sometimes we focus so much on the work that we have to do for them that we forget about them as people. And especially as our industry is moving into all this this new technology, and so much of it is automated, we're losing the connection. And so if you are able to create this customer experience, it really can change it. So as the quote that's on here, as Steve Jobs said, you've got to start with a customer experience and work toward the technology, not the other way around. And so love or hate Apple, you have to give them credit for the customer experience that they do create. Okay, so now let's jump over to some questions, because I know I've got some over here. Okay, so during post-onboarding, how do I deal with clients' request for changes and additions to the scope? Usually in the onboarding, you wouldn't have it in the kickoff meeting. You may have it as you start to transition towards the regular services, because we also value price our cleanup. So it's a set fee to take them to, you know, the regular monthly bookkeeping. So if they're looking to add, you know, to the scope, it would be on the monthly bookkeeping side. And again, it depends on the client. In some cases, it would go back to Steve, and he would say, you know, change of scope. I understand you want to add some services, no problem. Sometimes it's our account manager that does it. So it really does depend, you know, if it's a small thing, if it's, you know, goes from, you know, 5 employees to 15 employees, or if it's, okay, I need a reporting package, you know, for my board, then that would probably be handled by Steve. Whereas if it's small incremental changes, then it would be my account supervisor. Okay, cool. And Leanna said that she is wearing her bracelet from San Jose QB Connect, and it says success. Excellent. Okay. And Kimberly's asking if the session is recorded. It is recorded, and you will need to actually reply to the email that you would have received reminding you about the webinar, and request the recording. They're not just sending it out automatically. So are there any other questions? We've got about 2 minutes left. I don't think there are any other ones that have come in. Okay, so just a couple things to let you know. There is the next webinar, which is how to use, okay, so I think this description is wrong. The date is right, June 18th, but the next webinar is with Don Leaney, and it's how to use apps and technology to streamline your practice and increase revenue. So you do want to register for that, because that's going to be awesome. And the other thing is, once you sign off the webinar, you are going to have a survey that pops up. Please do give your honest feedback if there was something we could do to improve it. Always looking to learn. So please do give your feedback, whether the topic was relevant for you, and would be very helpful for any feedback that you can give to Intuit. That is it. I don't think I have any more questions. I don't. So if I'm all done. Anyone has any other questions, we're good to go. Otherwise, have an awesome rest of your day and a great week, and hope to see you all soon. Thanks for joining me.